say the joint was rocking, going round and round, yeah, reeling and rocking.
You know the Beatles and the Stones, but what about the 60s bands that time forgot? Let's uncover 20 legendary groups who faded from memory. 20. The Stooges. Ever heard of the band that practically invented punk before punk was even a thing? The Stooges were way ahead of their time, blending raw energy with dirty riffs that still inspire musicians today. The Stooges initially made little impact outside their native Detroit, Michigan, but their immense influence on future generations more than earned their place among the best 60s bands. The result of legendary frontman Iggy Pop's desire to marry the different strands of the music he loved, the tough urban blues of Howlin' Wolf and John Lee Hooker, the no-nonsense anthemic thrust of garage rockers such as the Kinks and the Sonics. The Stooges' self-titled, John Cale-produced 1969 debut album effectively drew the blueprint for punk, with its dirty, repetitive guitar riffs, nihilistic attitude, and desire to go out on a limb. These qualities ensured the album initially flew under the radar, but the Stooges and its follow-up, Funhouse, were later cited as an inspiration by artists as diverse as Alice Cooper, David Bowie, who co-produced the Stooges' third album, Raw Power, and would help launch Iggy Pop's solo career in the mid-70s, Sex Pistols, The Fall, and Joy Division. Indeed, the best Stooges songs remain seminal anthems of disaffected youth, with No Fun, I Wanna Be Your Dog, and Little Doll still causing nascent bands to make amps bleed to this day. 19. Jefferson Airplane. A band that embodied the psychedelic spirit of San Francisco in the 60s, Jefferson Airplane took listeners on a wild ride with their politically charged lyrics and trippy sounds. Another band that was formed in San Francisco, California, Jefferson Airplane got together in 1965 and initially consisted of Marty Balin, Paul Kantner, Signe Anderson, Jorma Kaukonen, and Spencer Dryden. However, Anderson left the band in 1966 and Grace Slick joined as a replacement. Jefferson Airplane is most famous for psychedelic sounds and collaborations with other San Francisco bands like the Grateful Dead and Santana. They released several albums in the 60s, but their two biggest hits were Somebody to Love and White Rabbit in 1967, which both reached the top 10 in the Billboard 100. In the late 1960s, San Francisco was to rock music what Liverpool had been in the early 60s, and Jefferson Airplane was the quintessential San Francisco band. Mixing folk, blues, and psychedelics, the theatrical group was known for unpredictable live shows. They also mixed politics and activism with their brand of rock and roll. 18. The Monkees. What happens when a manufactured band ends up making timeless hits that stand shoulder to shoulder with the best of the 60s? The Monkees might just surprise you. The 75 million records they sold worldwide mean that, based on their commercial yield alone, the Monkees deserve to be rated among the best 60s bands. Yet the US quartet had to fight for their credibility. Effectively, one of the music industry's first manufactured bands, the four group members, Davy Jones, Mike Nesmith, Peter Tork, and Mickey Dolenz, were brought together in 1966 to star in the NBC sitcom The Monkees, and the songs they recorded were initially provided by such brill-building songwriters as Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart, under the auspices of Don Kirshner, head of the group's record label, Coal Gems. Controlled by Kirshner and featuring the cream of the era's LA-based session musicians, the Monkees' initial releases, the singles Last Train to Clarksville and the Neil Diamond-penned I'm a Believer, and the albums The Monkees and More of the Monkees, all topped the US charts, though the band members would eventually gain some control of their music. recording self-penned material on their acclaimed third album, Headquarters. The Monkees' popularity waned after their TV show was canceled in 1968, but they secured their legacy with the release of their wonderfully satirical left-field movie, Head, a cult classic written and produced by Bob Rafelson and a pre-famed Jack Nicholson.
Well, we've been playing ever since the
third album.
But it was like the third album when they let us.
We played live well before the second album came out. We were on the road playing concerts, just the four of us, with no other backup band, when the second album came out. So
That was nice. And let me make it clear that they would not let us play. That was not a choice we made.
17. Simon and Garfunkel. A duo that didn't just make music. They defined the sound of a generation with haunting melodies and lyrics that still resonate. You know the songs, but do you remember the artists?
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
While they might not be considered a band by the usual definition, Simon and Garfunkel were a folk rock songwriting duo who were one of the best-selling artists in the 60s. The duo formed in 1963 and released their debut album, Wednesday Morning 3 a.m., the following year to moderate success. Undeterred, they released 3 more in the 60s, with the last 2 becoming commercial hits. The Sound of Silence, which is part of their second album of the same name, helped put them on the map. Other hits of the decade like Mrs. Robinson, Homeward Bound, and I Am a Rock all charted well.
When was the first time you guys toured together?
Well, toured together.
tough question. Dick Clark, Cincinnati.
Oh, that's right.
Was that one of those
Tom
rock and
and Jerry
roll
days.
caravan deals?
Sock hops.
Yeah.
Well, you mean ever when we were kids?
Sure.
Well, when we were kids, when we were 15 years old, we did a show up in the Hartford State Theater when we were 15.
16. The Jimi Hendrix Experience. A band fronted by a guitar god whose explosive riffs and electrifying stage presence redefined what rock music could be. But they were more than just Jimi's backing band. This was lightning in a bottle. Jimi Hendrix was so prodigiously talented that it's tempting to say he would have been a superstar regardless of who he played with. However, all the best 60s bands required a special chemistry to make such a seismic impact. And in that respect, the Jimi Hendrix Experience was no exception. They had a head start with the charismatic and virtuosic Hendrix out front, but it's unlikely their music would have taken off so quickly without the help of jazz octopus Mitch Mitchell on drums and the underrated Noel Redding playing the crucial anchor role on bass. Indeed, it was their almost supernatural understanding of each other that allowed the 3 musicians to cut their classic early singles, Hey Joe, Purple Haze, The Wind Cries Mary, and their landmark first 2 albums, Are You Experienced, Axis, Bold as Love, in just a matter of days. With hindsight, it's also telling that Hendrix struggled to make things gel with both the expanded band he later employed at Woodstock and with his short-lived Band of Gypsies project. He assembled a new lineup of The Experience with a returning Mitchell and Billy Cox replacing Redding during the final 6 months of his tragically short life. Sly and the Family Stone. A racially integrated band in the 60s that effortlessly blended soul, funk, and rock to create a sound that was both revolutionary and irresistibly groovy. Led by the brilliant if unpredictable Texan-born Sylvester Stewart, aka Sly Stone, San Francisco's Sly and the Family Stone are unquestionably one of the most groundbreaking outfits among the best 60s bands. The first major American rock act to feature a racially integrated mixed-gender lineup, They formed late in 1966 and pioneered a potent psychedelic soul sound all their own, blending elements of soul, funk, R&B, rock, and psychedelia. Regulars in the top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100 during the late 60s, with evergreen hits such as Dance to the Music, Everyday People, and Thank You for Letting Me Be Mice Elf Again, the Family Stone also released critically acclaimed albums such as Life and 1969's Excellent Stand, which married hard-hitting social commentary with a dynamic pop sensibility. Arguably one of the biggest bands in the US by the end of the decade, they played rapturously received shows at both the Harlem Cultural Festival and at Woodstock during the summer of 1969, and retained their popularity during the early 70s thanks to further landmark releases such as 1971's There's a Riot Going On and 1973's Fresh. 14. The Moody Blues, a band that took rock and fused it with classical music, creating lush soundscapes that were both grand and deeply emotional. Think you know symphonic rock? You have the Moody Blues to thank. The Moody Blues was a progressive psychedelic band that began recording in 1964. The band became famous for their operatic tunes such as Tuesday Afternoon and Nights in White Satin. Moody Blues consisted of Ray Thomas, Mike Pinder, Denny Lane, Clint Warwick, and Graham Edge. Moody Blues were the pioneers of classical rock, a subgenre of rock fusion that mixed classical music and pop music. Although best known for their psychedelic era music and grandiose lyrics, the Moody Blues began as a British invasion rhythm and blues group with the hit single Go Now, 1964. After a change in band members, including the departure of Lane, who later joined Paul McCartney's Wings, and the addition of Hayward and Lodge, the group released their landmark Days of Future Past, released in Britain in late 1967 and in the United States in early 1968. One of the first successful concept albums, it marked a turning point in the development of classical rock. An assemblage of musicians calling itself the London Festival Orchestra backed the band, and yielded two hits, Tuesday Afternoon and the signature Nights in White Satin. On In Search of the Lost Chord, 1968, they traded the orchestra for the Mellotron, an electronic keyboard that reproduces orchestral sounds. They continued to use electronic instruments in subsequent albums and had a number of hit singles, though, ironically, by the time Long Distance Voyager, 1981, and The Present, 1983 came out, the originality of their efforts had been obscured by their success, which had helped make synthesizers and philosophy part of the rock mainstream. Their rich symphonic sound influenced groups such as Yes, Genesis, the Electric Light Orchestra, and Deep Purple. The Moody Blues were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2018. 13. Fleetwood Mac. You may know Fleetwood Mac for their massive hits in the 70s and 80s, but did you know their journey started in the 60s with a completely different sound? Their blues roots might surprise you. The later and better known incarnation of Fleetwood Mac, featuring Stevie Nicks and the much-missed Christine McVie, made its mark on the 70s and 80s thanks to the enduring quality of such multi-million selling blockbusters as Rumors and Tango in the Night. However, these colossal records shouldn't be allowed to obscure the fact that, in a rather different guise, Fleetwood Mac had already experienced the peaks and troughs of fame before becoming one of the best bands of the 70s. In the latter days of the 60s, the group was a rather different beast. Though still underpinned by the stalwart rhythm section of John McVie, bass, and Mick Fleetwood, drums, the Fleetwood Mac that made their live debut at the Windsor's National Jazz and Blues Festival in 1967 was primarily blues-based. This first in a long run of Fleetwood Mac lineups also featured 2 guitarists and composers, and the group's prodigiously talented, if mercurial founder Peter Green, with a third, Danny Kirwan, enlisting during 1968. Brilliant if volatile, this version of the group nonetheless made albums. Their self-titled debut, 1968's Mr. Wonderful, 1969's Then Play On, and classic singles, Man of the World, the blissful chart-topping instrumental Albatross, Green Sinister, the Green Monalishi with the 2-prong crown, which secured their reputation as one of the best 60s bands long before Green quit in May 1970. 12. Steppenwolf, a band synonymous with biker culture and hard rock anthems. You've probably heard Born to Be Wild, but Steppenwolf's legacy stretches beyond one iconic track. This was an American-Canadian band that had some major hits. Members of the band included John Kay, Goldie McJohn, Jerry Edmonton, Michael Monarch, and Rushton Morieve. They were famous for making rock in the subgenre of biker rock. The band managed to sell more than 25 million records around the world. They also reached the Billboard Hot 100 with 13 singles and released 1 platinum album and 7 gold albums. Steppenwolf had breakthrough singles like Rock Me, Magic Carpet Ride, and Born to Be Wild that all managed to be top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 singles. In 2016, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominated them for induction in 2017. Although they fell short of enough votes to qualify for induction that year, in 2018, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame selected one of their biggest singles, 1968's Born to Be Wild, as one of the first 5 singles that shaped rock and roll to be inducted into the hall in its history. The band broke up after a farewell concert in Los Angeles on Valentine's Day 1972. Kay went on to a brief solo career, scoring a minor solo hit in 1972 with I'm Moving On from his album Forgotten Songs and Unsung Heroes. Although it received generally high marks from most critics, the album sales were disappointing in the US. Kay released a second solo album in 1973 on the Dunhill label titled My Sportin' Life. This album sold less than his first solo album and was less gritty and more LA studio polish in sound.
It was also the first Steppenwolf album on which Richard Padoler, who had previously assisted in engineering all of their studio work, was given the producer credit rather than Gabriel Meckler. The album was certified gold and peaked at number 19 on the albums chart, but none of its singles made it into the top 40, and Larry Byram departed the group.
11. Creedence Clearwater Revival, CCR. They captured the heart of Americana with swamp rock anthems that defined the late 60s. But behind the hits was a story of tension that led to a dramatic breakup. Consisting initially of John Fogerty, Tom Fogerty, Stu Cook, and Doug Clifford, Creedence Clearwater Revival, CCR, was formed in 1959 as the Blue Velvets in El Cerrito, California. They became Creedence only in 1967. The group had quite big hits during the end of the 1960s, with a series of top 10 hits climbing the charts, including Proud Mary, Bad Moon Rising, and Fortunate Son. Sadly, despite their rising popularity, Creedence Clearwater Revival disbanded in 1972 following the separation of John Fogerty. Clifford and Cook continued and created Creedence Clearwater Revisited. 10. The Kinks. From gritty rock to quintessentially British tunes, the Kinks' evolution in the 60s created a legacy of timeless songs that still resonate. But they're more than just You Really Got Me. First breaking through in 1964 with aggressive R&B influenced rock hits such as All Day and All of the Night, and the chart-topping You Really Got Me, the Kinks initially seemed like North London's answer to the Mercy Beat craze instigated by the rise of the Beatles. However, after frontman Ray Davies developed his highly individual style of songwriting, the Kinks found their own voice and went from strength to strength. In parallel with a string of era-defining hits such as Dedicated Follower of Fashion, Sunny Afternoon, and the sublime Waterloo Sunset, the band released a string of terrific albums from 1966's Face to Face through 1969's Arthur, or The Decline and Fall of the British Empire, all of which were stuffed with brilliantly observed songs reflecting the British way of life, both past and present. All of the above served to cement the Kinks' reputation as one of the best 60s bands, though inspired further releases, including Lola vs. Powerman and the Money Ground Part 1 and Muswell Hillbillies, ensured their imperial phase spilled over into the 70s. 9. Santana. One of the first bands to fuse Latin rhythms with rock, Santana set the Woodstock stage on fire in 1969. But there's more to them than just Carlos Santana's searing guitar solos. This is a Latin band with tremendous success, with its first album release performance in 1969 at Woodstock. Santana uniquely combines Latin blues, rock, salsa, and jazz with African rhythms. The band consisted of Carlos Santana, the only consistent member, David Brown, Jose Arias, Michael Shreve, Greg Raleigh, and Michael Carabello. Santana has been among the best bands globally, with more than 47 million albums sold in America and around 100 million sold around the world. After signing with Columbia Records, the band's appearance at the Woodstock Festival in 1969 increased their profile, and they went on to record the commercially successful and critically acclaimed albums Santana, 1969, Abraxas, 1970, and Santana 3, 1971. These were recorded by the group's classic lineup featuring Greg Raleigh, Michael Carabello, Michael Shreve, David Brown, and Jose Chapito Arias. Hit songs of this period include Evil Ways, Black Magic Woman, Oye Como Va, and the instrumental Samba Pati. 8. Deep Purple. Their heavy riffs and groundbreaking sound paved the way for hard rock and heavy metal. From Smoke on the Water to Child in Time, Deep Purple's influence is still felt in rock today. They were an English band formed in 1968. The band started as a progressive and psychedelic rock band before they progressed to heavier sounds. Many critics consider Deep Purple to be part of modern hard rock and heavy metal rock pioneers. Their heavy grinding music was very influential in the rock music industry. The band, in its lifespan, has sold more than 100 million records globally. All of the members of Deep Purple included John Lord, Nick Simper, Glenn Hughes, Richie Blackmore, and Rod Evans. Popular breakthrough songs of Deep Purple are Smoke on the Water, Black Knight, Child in Time, Not Fade Away, and Soldier of Fortune. Originally formed as a psychedelic rock and progressive rock band, they shifted to a heavier sound with their 1970 album, Deep Purple in Rock. Deep Purple, together with Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, have been referred to as the unholy trinity of British hard rock and heavy metal in the early to mid-70s. Listed in the 1975 Guinness Book of World Records as the globe's loudest band for a 1972 concert at London's Rainbow Theatre. 7. Grateful Dead. The ultimate embodiment of the 60s counterculture, Grateful Dead created a community of devoted fans and a sound that continues to resonate in jam bands across the globe. Can any other of the best 60s bands really hold a candle to Grateful Dead when it comes to embodying the idealism and countercultural aesthetic of that remarkable decade? That's surely a rhetorical question, for the legendary San Franciscan outfit, led by guitarist-vocalist Jerry Garcia, went their own sweet way right from the start. Making their live debut at one of Ken Kesey's infamous acid tests in San Jose in December 1965, the band was at the very heart of the hippie movement, openly supporting the usage of LSD and encouraging their loyal fans, known as Deadheads, to bootleg their concerts as they pleased. On stage, the Dead were renowned for indulging in lengthy, often free-form jams, but they could be more succinct on record. Their self-titled 1967 debut album reflected the band's blues roots, while their classic 1968 single Dark Star extended into a true tour de force in concert, and the band's gold-selling third album, Aoxo Maxoa, traced a growing confidence and accessibility which would blossom on Garcia and Company's rootsy early 70s classics, Working Man's Dead and American Beauty. 6. Traffic. Blending rock, jazz, and psychedelia, Traffic's experimental sound was ahead of its time, influencing generations of musicians with their genre-defying tracks. Traffic, an English band, was created in 1965 in Birmingham. It started as a psychedelic rock band but later changed its sound using new instruments such as keyboards and reed instruments in their music. The band has thrived more with albums than releasing singles. The band consisted of Steve Winwood, Jim Capaldi, Dave Mason, and Chris Wood. Traffic was popularly known for songs like Medicated Goo, Paper Sun, Pearly Queen, You Can All Join In, and Freedom Rider, though it ultimately must be considered an interim vehicle for singer, songwriter, keyboardist, guitarist Steve Winwood. Traffic was a successful group that followed its own individual course through the rock music scene of the late 60s and early 70s. Beginning in the psychedelic year of 1967 and influenced by the Beatles, the band turned out eclectic pop singles in its native Great Britain, though by the end of its first year of existence, it had developed a pop-rock hybrid tied to its unusual instrumentation. At a time when electric guitars ruled rock, Traffic emphasized Winwood's organ and the reed instruments played by Chris Wood, especially flute. After Dave Mason, who had provided the band with an alternate folk pop sound, departed for good, Traffic leaned toward extended songs that gave its players room to improvise in a jazz-like manner, even as the rhythms maintained a rock structure. The result was international success that ended only when Winwood finally decided he was ready to strike out on his own. The band was dissolved by Winwood's departure in early 1969. His departure went unexplained at the time, even to Capaldi and Wood, but he later said, "Because of the way I ended the Spencer Davis group, I saw no reason why I shouldn't leave Traffic and move on. It seemed to me a normal thing to do." Winwood's comments clash with the fact that the Davis group continued after he left. 5. The Velvet Underground. Dark, avant-garde, and way ahead of their time, the Velvet Underground shaped alternative rock even though they were largely ignored during their career. Like the Stooges, the Velvet Underground sold precious few records during their lifetime. Yet, if this list of the best 60s bands was to be based purely upon cool factor, then this singular New York City quartet, led by Lou Reed, would surely sit at its apex. It didn't hurt that the Velvets had the patronage of Andy Warhol, yet the music the group made was truly astonishing on its own terms. Reed could draw on his past as an in-house songwriter for Pickwick Records when dreaming up gloriously melodic songs such as Sunday Morning, Pale Blue Eyes, and Sweet Jane. But he also fearlessly tackled taboo subjects such as drug use, I'm Waiting for the Man, heroin, and S&M. Venus in Furs, while his multi-instrumental wingman John Cale had no qualms about dragging the band ever deeper into avant-garde territory on the likes of Black Angel Death Song and the terrifying 17-minute Sister Ray. Then, still an unsung hero, Reed quit the group following completion of their fourth album, Loaded, but the Velvet's passage to cult status began in earnest after the mainstream success of Reed's second solo album, the David Bowie and Mick Ronson produced Transformer, with the likes of Joy Division, the Jesus and Mary Chain, the Smiths, and many, many more later singing the praises of a group who remain the epitome of rock and roll cool.
Jack, you get it, Jack, say it, say it. Sweet Jane.
4. Moby Grape. A band brimming with talent and potential, yet their story is one of legal battles, mental health struggles, and lost opportunities. Moby Grape could have ruled the 60s. Moby Grape had a plethora of singer-songwriters in their lineup. Thankfully, there weren't too many cooks in the kitchen for the band to make amazing music in their time. Their melodies and groundbreaking sonic capabilities helped pave the way for many bands in the future. Moby Grape is an American rock band founded in 1966. Part of San Francisco's psychedelic music scene, the band merged elements of rock and roll, folk music, pop, blues, and country. They were one of the few groups of which all members were lead vocalists and songwriters. The group's first incarnation ended in 1969, in part due to members Bob Mosley and Skip Spence suffering from mental illness. The group has reformed many times afterward and continues to perform occasionally. Moby Grape's success was accompanied by decades-long legal disputes with their former manager, Matthew Katz. Legal difficulties originated shortly after the group's formation when Katz insisted on ownership of the group name. The dispute with Katz became more acute after the group members' rights to their songs were signed away in 1973 in a settlement made without their knowledge. As described by Jeff Tamarkin, the Grape saga is one of squandered potential, absurdly misguided decisions, bad luck, blunders, and excruciating heartbreak, all set to the tune of some of the greatest rock and roll ever to emerge from San Francisco. Moby Grape could have had it all, but they ended up with nothing and less.
Beginning a brand new day out of a hearing people.
3. Cream. What happens when three virtuosos come together to create a band? You get Cream, a supergroup that blended blues, rock, and psychedelia into unforgettable classics. Back when iconic guitarist Eric Clapton was part of music groups, Cream was one of them he formed with Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker in 1966. They were known for their innovative sound, which blended blues and hard rock. The band rose to fame with their first album, Fresh Cream. However, it was their 1967 album Disraeli Gears that featured one of their most famous singles, Sunshine of Your Love. This is one song every budding bassist and guitarist will learn at some point. As a band who landed a spot on Rolling Stone's 100 Greatest Artists of All Time list, they greatly influenced many future musicians, including Jimi Hendrix. Their works have earned them multiple Grammy Awards, as well as an induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
I can walk down the street, there's no one there.
2. The Who. Exploding onto the scene with rebellious anthems and a rock opera that redefined the genre, The Who took rock to new heights in the 60s. Ray Davies wasn't the only ambitious young London-based singer-songwriter to emerge in the aftermath of the initial British invasion of 1964-65. Indeed, to the southwest of Davies' Muswell Hill Manor in Shepherd's Bush, The Who's Pete Townshend, then barely pushing 20, had already written several of his band's career-defining songs, among them I Can't Explain and My Generation. Like the Kinks, The Who also drew upon R&B and soul influences, yet while they will forever be associated with the 60s mod movement, Townsend and his team developed on their own terms. Classic and often provocative singles such as the blistering I Can See for Miles and the masturbation-related Pictures of Lily served notice of Townsend's intent. But it was the transatlantic top 5 success of The Who's 4th album, the audacious double-disc rock opera Tommy, which forever set in stone The Who's reputation as one of the best 60s bands. 1. The Rolling Stones. The only band that could challenge the Beatles' dominance in the 60s. The Rolling Stones' gritty blues-infused rock still resonates with fans today, proving their enduring appeal. Though the likes of the Kinks and The Who also made a good fist of it, only one of the best 60s bands was really capable of stealing the Beatles' crown. Though starting out as blues purists on the London club scene, the Rolling Stones gained significant ground on their chart rivals after frontman Mick Jagger and guitarist Keith Richards' songwriting partnership blossomed, resulting in self-penned mid-60s smashes such as The Last Time, the Eastern-flavored Painted Black, and the iconic fuzzbox-driven I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Beginning with 1966's Aftermath, the Stones also established themselves as serious album artists as the decade continued. And while they were perhaps unfairly derided for their psych pop odyssey, their Satanic Majesty's Request, late 60s masterpieces Beggar's Banquet and Let It Bleed brought the group right back into contention. Their decade ended in turbulence with the death of multi-instrumental founder member Brian Jones in July 1969, a tragedy followed by the murder of fan Meredith Hunter at the band's disastrous free concert at California's Altamont Speedway in December of the same year. But the Stones weathered the storm and remain a going concern to this day, despite the loss of founding member and drummer Charlie Watts in August 2021.
See the joint was rocking, going round and round, yeah, reeling and rocking.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe for more deep dives into music history. Don't forget to check out our other videos on iconic eras and forgotten legends. Keep exploring, and we'll see you in the next one.